Hello and welcome to the 1895 podcast with me, Thomas D.
And me, Rob Cockerell.
And Rob, we're back in the studio for this one. We've been out on the road for a few weeks. Last week, of course, we heard that live episode we recorded in Utrecht. Great to listen back to that.
It was, yeah. Great energy you just came into that pod with as well, Tom. Great energy. Yeah, fantastic to listen to that. And this is very much the final of the trilogy from that event, isn't it?
Yes, we're going to review that event now. We've been back for 3 weeks now, so we've had plenty of time to review the footage and reflect on the event itself. So it'd be great to go through some of the key talking points, some of the key presentations, and listen to a few of the clips from those speakers on stage.
Where has that gone? 3 weeks already. Absolutely flown by. And we're in the midst of a huge heat wave here at the moment as well.
It's nice, yeah, it's great.
Matching the intensity of the conversation we had at that event in Utrecht. Listeners won't be able to see it, of course, but I am wearing the 1895 polo
Very
today.
on brand.
Yeah.
It's good to see.
It's
good
wasted,
to see you up in the 1895 podcast. So for this, I think we should start at the beginning, don't you think, with our opening keynote?
Usually a good place to start.
Normally a good place to start, and we're going to do that just now with Miguel Lopez of Air Products. Great to have him there as our opening keynote, and a fantastic scene setter for the event ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Air Products was, of course, our headline partner for this event, or platinum sponsor, I believe. Yes, and they had a great presence across the event. Great to have an authority such as Air Products in industrial and specialty gases all over the world, in fact. So really happy to have that partner for the event. And yes, Miguel Lopez's keynote was a very on-point scene setter, I would say. Yeah,
so let's take a quick listen to that.
No matter where you are in Europe, and actually no matter where you are in the world, you're going to have Air Products around you, helping you to develop and helping you with your needs of specialty gases. Like I said, our presence in all of the industries, we not only see one, we see all of the industries using gases and specialty gases, give us very good insights on where the demand comes, where are the market trends. You see there are many industries, 15 industries, that are driving spec gases demand. From analytical laboratories, electronics, emission monitoring, gas analysis, forensic science. I'm going to touch on three, which are the three highlighted in pale green: electronics, as we said, energy transition, not always obvious why spec gases play there, and biological and science. Going into the electronics industry, and I'm sure we'll talk more during this next couple of days about how the electronics industry is driving the demand of spec gases. I'm not going to say anything new when I say that the electronics industry has gone through decades of growth, but it will continue with decades of growth on production of microchips. Not only because of the mega trend of the artificial intelligence being more and more present in our lives, also the 5G, etc. That means more chips will be produced, but also those chips will be more complicated. They will need to manage more transactions within the same space. More transistors will be in every chip. They've become already much more complicated than they were 20 years ago. That means that the demand per chip of specialty gases, more ultra-pure, more complicated, will keep growing. So that is the first key mega trend that we see in spec gases. The other one that I was saying is not so obvious is decarbonization and emission monitoring. First of all, regulation across Europe and globally is driving for more strict controls on emissions, industrial emissions, pollutants control, etc. So calibration mixtures, especially those under 17 or 25, become more and more important. Reporting also being very important, related to the regulation. ESG regulations, more and more companies being worried about monitoring their CO2 emissions. That means that reliable gas mixtures for accurate measuring equipment become also in higher demand. The third leg that you see there, under the banner of new developments, new energies, new sources of energy, biogas, biomethane, the use of hydrogen in fuel cells. The increased number of installations in biogas and biomethane mean that spec gases are in increased demand, especially for accurate measuring equipment, for monitoring, for analysis. Fuel cell hydrogen with very strict characteristics on the impurities that it has, so it doesn't harm the fuel cell. It means you need to control that quality of that hydrogen, something very close to Air Products' heart, being the global hydrogen leader. Biologics, innovation and advanced therapies, also driving spec gases demand. Maybe not so obvious either. Personalized medicine. Think about cell therapies, personalized medicine, RNA vaccines. You need analytical gases and custom gas mixtures for R&D and for production. Advanced therapies, medicine from living cells. It's driving demand for ultra-high purity gases for inerting, purging, and sterile environments. And then regulatory linked to it. More and more stricter and stricter regulatory controls on those on the pharma industry, driving for UHP pharma gases. Those are the mega trends that we see.
And that was Mikel Lopez there. Like you say, fantastic scene setter to go over those trends and, you know...
That supply chain resilience, that kind of strategic view. Yeah.
And given that helicopter view of what we were to hear so much more about in depth over the next couple of days, he discussed so much more as well, you know, supply chain security, safety and
helium,
Air Products in a
very enviable position there.
Yeah, so it was great to hear that. And he also took a few audience questions in the Q&A, didn't he? Some interesting questions there, I thought.
Did. I mean, obviously I was moderating that, so I was on the stage with him, looking at the questions coming in, unsure whether he'd be happy to take all of those, unsure if he'd be guarded, where a couple of them were concerned. You know, regular listeners will know it's been a tumultuous first half of the year for Air Products with their leadership battle, the boardroom saga that was going on. We've talked about it enough on this podcast. And sure enough, it came up in the Q&A, and I wasn't entirely confident putting that question to Mikel, admittedly. And then I ended up so pleasantly surprised. He was more than happy to take it and gave us a fantastic response, actually.
Well, let's take a listen to that.
One final question. I'm not sure how able you'll be to answer this. There's been a rather high-profile change in leadership at Air Products this year. Not sure if anyone's aware.
I can answer that more than any more detailed question about spec gases.
Well, how do you think that change in leadership could potentially impact your spec gas strategy? I mean, would there be any change? Will there be a bigger focus now? Less on clean energies, more on spec gas, more on the core?
Well, for the audience and the ones that don't know about the change of leadership in Air Products, we recently went through a rather, tumultuous and exciting times. Where our CEO that had been with us for more than 10 years was, left the company and was substituted by a new CEO. Air Products has taken a very strong position in the energy transition, taking very bold steps, very first mover steps in hydrogen, with some of the biggest hydrogen projects in the world, like the hydrogen project in NEOM in Saudi Arabia, which is today still the biggest by far, the biggest green hydrogen product in execution in the world. So not on a spreadsheet or not on a PowerPoint, but being executed. Or our Darrow project in Louisiana in the US, which is a blue hydrogen project. With those two projects, other projects were in development, other discussions were in development. New leadership in Air Products has shifted a little bit the focus from being the first mover always in hydrogen to securing customers more in line with the traditional industrial gases business model, securing customers for those 2 very large projects, putting on hold some of the other first mover projects, making sure that we first secure customers and then we develop the projects. And we've made, the new leadership has made very strong commitment to our base business. And there's nothing more base business for the industrial gases industry than specialty gases. So if we're going to see something from new management is more focus, more resources, and a more aligned strategy for base gases and specialty gases. So I think it's a good thing for specialty gases, the new management of products.
Refreshing to hear that honesty at our event, isn't it? And you know, he didn't shy away from that question either. So glad you did put that to him.
He could easily have shut that down, and we've seen that happen time and time again, haven't we? And I was really, as I said, really pleasantly surprised he decided to take that one on, and so eloquently. And really reaffirmed, actually, a lot of the analysis that we've delivered at GasWorld and we've talked about in this pod. You know, all the future direction and where, in a sense, Air Products and the rest of the industry going back to the core, that whole sense. I think that sentiment came out from Mikkel.
Yeah, so fantastic there. So thanks to Mikkel and to Air Products for sponsoring the event as a whole. But following that, we went into session 1, where we heard from Lita Schonroy of TechSet, Dr. Jonas Sunkvist, also of TechSet, and Dr. Torsten von Steim of Merck. This was a session dedicated to semiconductors and specialty gases, and some great talking points in that we'd love to bring it all to the podcast here, but we might just have to pick out a few clips.
We would, and I think it's interesting, I just mentioned again about the industry going back to the core, back to the traditional, which is very much where spec gases are. But with this session, we're really talking about the hot growth drivers in specialty gases and that all-important chip manufacture and the spec gases required for semiconductors. So really interesting session. Like you said, we did get those 3 rounded market outlooks. I thought there was great value in all 3 of those talks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I think for purposes of time on this podcast, we should just dive into a few minutes of Lita's
a few snippets.
Yes.
When it comes to what's driving demand, it is consumption and stuff, what drives demand of most products and now the semiconductor industry. After 25 to 30 years of maturation, the chip industry is now largely driven by consumer demand. It used to be the killer app. When the iPhone came out, everybody wanted one. That was after the Mac came out. And so those days have now kind of slowed down. iPhones and computers are much more consistent with regard to their growth, and there's really very few killer apps that are out there. We will talk about AI, however, but for the moment, that is why now the chip industry follows GDP more closely. However, on average, the chip market has outperformed GDP by about double. So even if, as the World Bank has noted yesterday, that their estimate of global GDP has come down from what was 2.7 to 2.3, and they've downgraded the U.S. from what was 2.4 to now, actually 2.4, then 2.3, and now it's 1.4 GDP for the U.S. So despite those numbers, the semiconductor market will still have healthy growth on the order of what is on average about 6% per year. So that's good news, despite all of the turmoil that's going on right now that is affecting the economy. So let's take a look at chip fab investment. Now, some of you may be concerned about the slowness of the investment or slowing of the investment that's coming out. However, it's important to note that those investments that have been announced from 2024 through 2029, or at least the spending to be done by 2029, totals now $871 billion. And the delays that you've heard about are things like the Intel delay of Magna Bird and the Israel Intel fab has also been delayed somewhat indefinitely. But the ESMC continues to be on schedule, which is for the end of 2027. In the US, TSMC has completed the build of 2 fabs, even though they have been complaining about cost increases of materials because of having to ship materials from overseas and or buy materials locally. So this is a theme that is common to the US and Europe, and I will restate it again with regard to some of the specialty gases, especially those that are caustic to the container. The issue of shipping these from overseas becomes a problem for chip fabricators because if there's a quality excursion and there has to be lot sampling traced back, that several weeks to a month or more now coming to Europe, a lot of those gases are coming around the southern tip of Africa to get here to avoid the Houthi rebel issues, right? So that month that it takes to get here would mean if a chip fab had a quality problem, it would take another month to try to diagnose, to get the material just to be able to start diagnosing that issue. And that is why chip fabricators are so keen on local supply if they can get it. All of you have heard of AI. It is the thing that everyone's excited about. It actually has given chip revenues quite a boost last year, even though a lot of the market, especially the automotive market segment, was down. And what we see at TechSet is that AI is starting to enable, or we call it encroach, in everything that we use. You see it in your phone when you try to search for something. You have no choice. It's somehow Google hooks itself to Copilot or Gemini, and you get some sort of response from an AI bot. It is looking to be integrated into computers, not just cell phones, but smart pads. And if you've seen some of the development ongoing that Elon Musk has, I know he's not a favorite of many people these days, but it could even be integrated into someone's brain one day. So, and that is being experimented on with regard to chip technology today. Automotive, smart vehicles, EVs, it's very easy to integrate it into there because it's got a processing unit, which so do all the other applications. So it's coming. The biggest news and mover of the world economy is the US and China, and they have been fighting, as you know. They just came out of meetings in London. The latest announcement on that is that there have been some agreements that have been made, but they have to be checked with, they have to be approved by both countries' presidents. And so let me read you the quote that I had extracted this morning from there. And that is, it's an interesting political quote, that two sides agreed in principle, said the senior Chinese negotiator Li Chenggang. And from the US, the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said, the two largest economies in the world have reached a handshake for a framework, but both parties must go off and get their presidents to agree to whatever this framework is. And there have been no details that have been released. Now, we all know that the two things that are on the table that are most contentious are that the US wants rare earth minerals and magnets, and China wants access to technology, especially aerospace and military-related technology, as well as semiconductor equipment. So they seemed very far apart before the meeting took place. I'm very interested to see what comes back in the next few days. So regardless, with regard to uncertainties, as the World Bank has noted, the interaction or lack of interaction between these two countries can cause some definite impact on the world economy and markets. So we should all look out for that, but remember to note that the semiconductor industry will outperform overall GDP. And the World Bank did say that the chance of recession is less than 10% overall. So they don't see that as likely. And if the trade negotiations between China and U.S. improve or are lightened up from what they were initially, which has got to be the case, then we see an even better, brighter future.
And that was Lita Shomroy of TechSec. Great to get into so much there, the demand drivers, the chip fab, investment, AI, tariffs. Covered a lot of ground there in her 20 minutes.
Yeah, a lot of ground. And I think tariffs made up some further questions in the Q&A, if I remember rightly. I'm pretty sure I was firing a few of those over. And those topics, of course, fed a lot of our polls, our live polls that were going on across the event. So it was interesting to see the sentiment shifting in the audience as they heard those different bits of information. I think one of the things that stands out for me is all of this chip fabrication investment that's going on around the world and in some hotspots compared to others. And yet we heard from Lita, and we would go on to hear from other speakers across the event, that actually there's a lot to be proud of in Europe. That was very much a European spec gas summit, and there's a lot to be, optimistic about in Europe. There's a very there's a plentiful investment pipeline, but more than that, I can't remember the exact words, but we basically heard how Europe was at the heart of innovation, and still is, and still will be in the years ahead. So there was a lot of enthusiasm for chip manufacture and, of course, specialty gases and their development going forward.
And the talking point surrounding that and tying in the tariffs was that perhaps, tariffs might drive further innovation towards Europe. So
absolutely, yeah.
Have to wait and see on that. Moving on to session 2 now, and this was our second keynote of the day, second keynote of the event, and that was from Phil Kornbluth of Kornbluth Helium Consulting, very much dedicating this session to, of course, helium and the future that it holds in Europe.
Absolutely. Phil, of course, a regular voice in this parish, shall we say, and part of our editorial advisory boards, often a speaker at our events, and did speak at this event last year, but of course it was via video link. This time it was in person. I think there was a good feeling about that, wasn't there? There was a lot of opportunity you could see Phil work in the networking breaks, or rather people working him in the networking breaks, and it was great to get his talk in person, unadulterated, and all of his candid viewpoints on the state of the helium business. So good to get all of that.
Yeah, so let's dive into some of that right now.
It's increasingly a high-tech gas. That's why most of the people in this room would care about it. Semiconductor chip manufacturing has surpassed MRI as the leading application. Of course, chip manufacturing is a growing application. MRI is a gradually shrinking application. So they're moving in different directions, and I believe, that chip manufacturing is going to be far and away the biggest helium application in the coming years. Another growth area right now that's high-tech is aerospace. So the more launches, the more demand for helium. Usually helium trades in US dollars at the wholesale level. That's starting to change a little bit, but usually it's in US dollars. About 40% of capacity comes from the US, which is down considerably from what it used to be. When I started in the business, it was over 90% of supply was coming from the US. So it's the supply chain is becoming much more diversified. About a third of demand is in the US. About 15% comes from China, the second biggest market. And the Chinese market has been a growth market in recent years. It's been the most dynamic market. Supply has been plentiful throughout all of 2024 and 2025 year to date. I'm being conservative using the word plentiful. There is oversupply in the market. Some markets more than others. The Chinese market is swamped with helium because a lot of the Russian helium is ending up in China. So prices have moderated significantly during 2024, but they're still at high levels compared to what they were before helium shortage 4.0. And there are still circumstances where people are getting price increases. So, there was a big increase from ExxonMobil January 1st that was kind of lagged 2 years from what that price increase was indexed to. And where the contracts are favorable for the seller, they've been passing that increase through to their customers. So even in a market where prices are generally moderating, there still has been some price increase activity. Demand growth has been modest, and very clearly the helium market is a buyer's market right now. So, folks are negotiating, let's just say as contracts renew or new business prices are lower than they were previously. I have a slide on tariffs just because I felt like that it's in the news so much and all that I need to at least mention it. Tariffs are not as big a deal for helium as they might be, or I should say U.S. tariffs are not as big a deal because the U.S. is a net exporter of helium. We've always been a net exporter of helium. So really, the impact of tariffs on U.S. helium are that U.S. sourced helium becomes less competitive in folks that have reciprocal tariffs. So, and in some markets like China, the U.S. helium has already become uncompetitive in China because the helium coming in from Russia is a lot less costly than helium from the U.S. So the U.S. is almost out of the Chinese market, and now depending on where tariffs settle out, it can be completely uncompetitive in China. But it's no impact on supply, I would say, which remains plentiful with or without tariffs. But some supply chains may be reorganized in terms of which source supplies which market, things like that, to minimize tariffs. So, not a huge deal, but the situation is still so fluid. Who knows what's going to happen in another month with tariffs.
And that was Phil Kornbluth there, once again returning to the topic of tariffs, but also demand, supply. And he discussed so much more that we can't play here, looking at future outlook and
Black Swan events.
Interestingly, because just a couple of days after that, we nearly saw the beginning of one of those.
We just landed, hadn't we, at Bristol Airport as a team. We just landed on our way back to base, and all of the conflict in the Middle East had certainly gone up several levels. That prospect of a Black Swan event was right there in our faces.
Yeah, it appears to have died down somewhat now, but these Black Swan events can come out of nowhere, and of course this will be a topic for further discussion later this year at our Helium Super Summit, which will be returning to Austin in October.
It will, 20th to the 22nd of October, and we'll have a helium webinar before then in September, I think.
Yes, September 26th. We're going to discuss it on.
I was about to say with both of those we'll have much more of a view on the market and those Black Swan events, but of course we don't know, do we? But what I think is interesting is certainly that webinar will be a good precursor, and then the Helium Super Summit is always renowned to be the place to find out everything there is to know about helium. So
plenty more helium content to come this year. But rounding off day one of our event, we had session 3, and we were discussing advancing the molecule in this session with Dr. David Thompson of Intel Corporation, Harco van der Berg of Air Products, and Dr. Nicholas Gosset of Air Liquide.
Yes, so this talking track, this advancing the molecule, and actually the overall theme for the event of supply chain chemistry and collaboration, a lot of that was inspired by Dr. David Thompson and his appearance in person at the event last year, and he talked about a less transactional makeup between the semiconductor sector, the chip manufacturers, and the specialty gas supply chain. He talked about more collaboration. He gave a call to action. Let's partner on these things and have a relationship, not a transaction. It was a very popular undercurrent of that event, and then we've made it a bigger talking point this time around. And so he really picked up where he left off on that, didn't he? For confidentiality purposes, we can't bring any snippets of that talk. You had to be in the room, unfortunately. But all I can say is he had a lot of people thinking about molecule development and collaboration and what the future does hold and still could hold in that regard.
And if that's not a reason to attend next year, then
absolutely.
I don't know what is. I can see the time flying by, so let's dive into a couple of short clips from this session, and we'll pick out one from Harco and one from Nicholas too.
Another, let's say, spear point of our strategy, enabling the clean energy and the role of the specialty gases in that. So what we see here is that there is a push, of course, for clean energy, especially in the growth of the renewable and low emission energy sources, right, like biogas and biomethane, and the transitional fuels. Biogas, for example, where you generate electricity and heat, often with excess energy being fed back into the grid. Specialty gases here play an essential role in the monitoring of the emissions. On the transitional fuels, where there are blends of natural gas and biogas, we help reduce CO2 and emissions, where the specialty gases support this by enabling accurate analysis of the fuel mixtures. Hydrogen, finally, being used for the mobility and used as backup power of the energy transition. And these applications require high purity hydrogen to ensure safe and efficient operations. And altogether, these applications highlight how specialty gases are not just supporting, but also enabling the energy transition.
The main takeaways of that talk that I wanted to bring you. There is no plug-and-play solution. So please be aware and keep in mind that developing new molecules and adopting them will take time, that it needs to be done collaboratively. Air Liquide has been working with the entire ecosystem, so we are working with the pump makers, with the tool makers, with the customers, everyone to ensure that our gas are compatible with the chamber, that they are compatible with the pump, with the abatements, that they can be abated nicely and with high efficiency. But that's a whole ecosystem that needs to work on that. And since we are collaborating with the whole ecosystem, we can speed up the adoption of such molecule, but that will still require some time and some process development. Okay. Even modifying one step with one molecule, new molecule, can make a big difference in your process. So, yes, process developers usually do not speak the sustainability language. That's true. It's not only about GWP, it's also about CO2 equivalent emission, and so how your molecule break down, which process benefit does it bring to you, and so on and so forth, and how it is produced. Big part of it. And affordability, safety, waste generation, abatement efficiency, all matters. So at the end of the day, if you keep using the same molecules as today and you need to invest in abatements, that will cost you maybe much more than going for an alternative molecule that can match, that can be nicely decomposed with your current abatement system, even though the molecule is slightly more expensive. Or carbon tax equivalents, and so on and so forth.
There we go. That was Harco discussing spec gas in the energy transition. Of course, a big topic, the energy transition, always going to be. And Nicholas on different etching gas solutions and, you know, as you say, advancing the molecule.
Yeah, I think that topic of specialty gases in the energy transition, I mean, Harco, also Air Products, picked up on a theme from Mikel Lopez's keynotes earlier in the day and ran with that and gave us a bit more information on where those specialty gases are used and why, as well, of course, as Air Products' resilience in that area of the supply chain. But it came up in a number of talks, didn't it? Which some of those we'll get to later as well. That became a bit of an undercurrent, I found. I was making lots of notes in my notebook across across the 2 days about that whole sector. So I thought that was quite interesting.
And I did speak to Harco on camera following his presentation, so should urge listeners to go and watch that on gasworld.com. Well worth a watch.
Yeah, absolutely, because that is often an overlooked area for the spec gas supply chain.
Certainly is. And that did in fact conclude day one. You touched on it earlier. We had polls running throughout the whole event, not only day one but day two as well. Any idea what these told us?
Off the top of my head, Tom, from my memory, I think we ran either 5 or 6 polls across the 2 days. So there were a lot of interesting results. And as I said, the needle kept shifting as we went through, and people had different viewpoints on those topics, and their area of concern might suddenly sharpen or not. A couple of that come to mind. We heard that helium was the gas people were most concerned about, where recovery and reuse of gases or specialty gases was concerned, which I was surprised by, because we're not in a period of shortage. In fact, supply is arguably plentiful. Or you've got all of the dynamics that go along with that. So I was surprised to hear that. I think argon was trending as the second most concerning gas in that regard. But yeah, I was surprised we didn't hear more about neon or xenon or the other rare gases. Trying to think of some other results. There was a lot of concern around PFAS. Yep. I think we need to have an episode on that soon, Tom.
I think so.
And again, we'll cover that with one of our other speakers later. But PFAS was a concern for the industry. What other polls did we have there, Tom? A better supply chain transparency was one of the results coming out of the event. One of the concluding polls. What would you most want to see from specialty gas suppliers in the next year, and thinking ahead to the next gathering, of course, in Frankfurt next year. 29% said better supply chain transparency, which was interesting. Also, strong results for more sustainable products, which is interesting. Maybe that's with PFAS in mind, maybe not. And again, a call to action there, the audience polling in favour of greater collaboration and product development. Quite an interesting split there. There were some votes for more competitive pricing. I guess you're going to find that in any supply chain. But yeah, they were just some of the topics. We've got more to dissect at gasworld.com in the days and weeks ahead.
Into day two now, and we started with another keynote, our third keynote of the event, and this was from Virginia Esley of Mesa. You were very excited to secure this one and get Virginia at our event, weren't we? And she certainly delivered too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very excited because Virginia just embodies female empowerment in the industry, and we need more of that. She's a great speaker. Obviously, Mesa is another authority in the industrial and specialty gases business with a global footprint. And of course, Virginia Esley is the COO for the Europe region for Mesa, so a real big name. She certainly delivered on stage, didn't she, Tom?
She certainly did, yeah. It was interesting, the points she picked up on the infrastructure and the localization need to succeed in this business.
Absolutely, and a confident, composed keynote on stage, as you'd expect as well.
Yeah, so let's take a listen.
So it's the global infrastructure. So post-pandemic, you all know, we have faced a really big shortage in semiconductors. And at the same time, countries started to ramp up their local investments to cater for that and building semicon facilities. Just think about, China has a long track record. Already for 10 years, they have been providing funding and so on. So they are already in the third phase with 45 billion. But in a total, they have already provided 125 billion. Followed by the US CHIPS and Science Act. Here also, 50 billion in the game to support the business, to grow the business. Also Korea, don't forget about that, 65 billion investment and tax reductions in the area. But also Europe, now also coming very strong with the EU Chip Act, and Rob has talked about that also today, this morning. So 45 billion for grants and loans. And in the mix, also Taiwan, Japan, and the like. So you see a lot of energy, a lot of funding going into the topics. And it seems we've heard it yesterday also, really fostering the growth we want to see there and the localization. So, and this all resulted in construction start of 18 fabs for 2025. And still, you see a lot of still going on in Asia, but we have 4 fabs already seeing in the US being constructed and 3 additional in EMEA. So I think this is also a very strong signal for the European market. And as I've already mentioned a few times, this includes warehousing, because warehousing is key to ensure in-time delivery. So products with an extensive BCPs and competitive sources in Asia, this is really important. And that's why it's important to partner with companies with a very strong global footprint to mitigate that risk. So you need a high degree of localization, and you need to be close to your customer and your customer production facilities. But what did I say before? What goes hand in hand with the topic of global structure? It's also to emphasize the importance of a really broad and resilient product portfolio, because this is really necessary to capitalize on your global footprint. Without an extensive product portfolio, your global footprint is not making too much sense. So the big advantage of this extensive portfolio is also you have leverage in logistics. So I think this is one big key element. You have the ability to synthesize core ESG components and localize them by blending or transfilling. And also shorten supply chain cycles to our end customers. So these are 3 things which are very important and which can be leveraged when you have this broad product portfolio. And also here, this just together with the global footprint, the extensive product portfolio allows your strong partners to serve with continuity and stability. So, and I'm very proud also to give a few examples from Messer perspective, how we are working on this extensive product portfolio. First of all, securing key molecules is super important, and this is a very important success factor. And Messer was recently able to purchase the US National Helium Reserve, and this is an important factor because we've talked about helium storage, we've talked about helium supply, and with this big advantage, we are able to secure a stable and reliable supply to all our customers worldwide. So this is really a big milestone. Additionally to that, technology is very important. Investing in technology. And one example is on-site technology like we're providing for high purity CO2 applications. This is also something which is important because technology gives us all as suppliers a competitive edge. And being ahead of the curve, not to forget that one. Securing supply by investing in R&D to synthesize ESGs, to have the best control over availability, but also quality.
And that was Virginia Esley there. Also interesting that she picked up on the need for a broad product portfolio as well. You can't just stick to one, stick to what you know, essentially.
No, exactly. And again, I feel like I'm reminded of our financial results episode where we talked about a diverse, balanced strategy and offering, and not just all eggs in one basket. So interesting to hear her reflect upon that. And of course, I'm sure we'll see Virginia back for the event next year when it is in Frankfurt, and Messer are the headline sponsor. We were delighted to leave Utrecht with that news.
Yes, fantastic news, and be great to get them back next year on stage more, no doubt. Moving into session 4 now, and this was all about equipment innovation. We held a similar...
Chaired by you.
Chaired by me, yep. We held a similar session last year, so it was great to return to that topic. This time with Kevin Klotz of WorldCo, who made the trip over from the US, Joachim Sabate of PDC Machines, and Dr. Torsten Kuster of GCE.
Yeah, I mean, great panel, Tom. It was good to move the conversation on. Having talked about the supply chain and specialty gases, the resilience, and of course all those huge growth areas in demand and chip manufacture, it was good to then shine the spotlight on the equipment side, because actually you need that. You can't deliver all this without that critical equipment. So, really strong, diverse panel, I thought. Great to have WorldCoa flying in from the US for that. What an endorsement, I have to say. But what were your thoughts as chair?
It was a good session. It was great to dive into those technical aspects of the industry and those, I guess, making spec gas happen or progressing the industry further. And like you say, a really diverse panel there with Kevin, Joachim and Torsten to discuss so much throughout the whole spec gas industry. Automation
felt like a theme coming through.
Yeah, Kevin's was very heavily invested in automation, and perhaps they're the clips that we should pick out for this podcast.
Yesterday, one of the questions that came up was, how do we define specialty gases? And I think it's a good question. I'm actually the one that asked it, so I'm sorry if I put pressure on anybody yesterday, but it's almost an impossible thing to answer because 15 years ago, as I was getting into the specialty gas market and learning about it, I think the definition would be slightly different than it is today. I used to say that it was any gas that required some sort of a advanced blending technique, a advanced analysis, or anything beyond standard. And I think that's changed completely today because what we would consider specialty gases is, a lot of pure gases for the electronics industry, gas mixtures, EPA protocols, primary standards, hydrocarbon blends, and beyond. So I think every day that definition's changing. And so in order to keep up with that, we kind of have to stay very fresh on everything. So there's a growing complexity. Obviously, there's a demand for all of these molecules. There's a demand for purity. There's a demand for tolerances. And finding a way to keep up with that is a key thing here. And so, behold the world of automation. We see it everywhere we go, like we talked about, from our smartphones to AI to the way we drive our cars to the way that we interact with almost everything in the world. In the gas industry, although it has been at points slow to adopt certain things, is no stranger to automation. So, some of the obvious benefits and roles of automation, we can standardize a process. We are striving to have consistency in the industry. The last thing that we want to do is supply gases to somebody at an inconsistent level. It hurts our relationship, it hurts progress, it hurts opportunity to develop products. And so if we can standardize on that, it is a huge, huge benefit to anybody, to an end user, to a customer, to a gas distributor, to a major and beyond. So, some of the obvious benefits, you hire a new employee, an automated system, whether it's a automated gas filling system, a automated analytical system, data monitoring, cylinder tracking, asset monitoring. It speeds up processes for anybody that's getting into the role. It makes things easier, it makes things more uniform, and just a heck of a lot better for the entire world. I've got a little note at the bottom, when is a manual system better? Obviously, I like to tout automation. I'm a huge fan of it and a believer, but there are going to be times in our world where a automated filling system is not always the solution, or an automated sampling system is not always the solution. And so we can talk a little bit more about some examples of that later, but there's always going to be a world for some manual equipment, and I feel bad saying that because we're trying to make the shift. So I've got a picture-heavy PowerPoint. I wanted to point out a couple things. Automation can mean many things, but one of it, we've got a shot here of a pump monitoring system for an oxygen filling system that allows you to see exactly what's going on in real time, whether you're on site, whether you're working remotely. Having metrics here is the best way to keep our operations running. I think yesterday in one of the presentations, somebody mentioned the fact that you could have a multi-million-dollar operation going, and if your cryogenic oxygen pump stops working on you, it shuts everything down. And it's a small asset in comparison to the big picture of what's going on, but it will absolutely stop production. And so if we can know the health of our equipment, if we can know how we are running things, the efficiency, it will help us to understand when we need to do maintenance, preventative maintenance, predictive maintenance. And these are all things that the world of automation can help us with.
And that was Kevin Klotz of WorldCoa there. Interesting to start that with a definition of spec gas, which was a question which came up, in fact, a couple of times.
Yeah, I think I think he posed a question to the panel in session 1 as well, actually. I'm pretty sure it was him that asked, how do you define specialty gases then? Because I guess it is a constantly evolving sphere, and where specialty gases are different to industrial gases is they're quite often gas mixtures and calibration gases and so on. So you get all these different compositions, and our event was about advancing the molecule, of course, and we heard from Dr. David Thompson of Intel talking about new molecule development. So a very pertinent question to ask, well, how do you define spec gases? And I just wanted to add, I was sat in the audience, of course, while you were chairing on stage for that one. I saw a lot of nodding heads throughout Kevin's talk, so a lot of support and, I guess, investment in automation and technology.
And it's great to hear all those benefits of automation. And one that I particularly liked was the lack of corner cutting, which automation brings into your business. You don't have a person there saying, I can do that quicker, and perhaps drop the ball on it slightly.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting presentation there. Following that session, we of course recorded our live episode of the 1895 podcast. We're not going to play any of that back here on this podcast because we released that in full.
Good conversation though, wasn't it?
Very good to have
Fluid.
Rich Brook up there. So do be sure to go back and listen to that. And talking of Rich Brook, we concluded the event with Rich in our final session, Rich from Garrison Ventures, and also Teresa Kjell of Chemsec, discussing PFAS, as you said earlier.
We did indeed. And Rich, as you can probably tell, listeners, from our previous episode, he's always got a story to tell. He's always spinning a yarn, a very interesting one as well. But it meant we were chasing our tail a little bit in that session, weren't we? Thanks, Rich, for that. But yeah, he gave us an insight into various innovations and future sourcing opportunities with helium, and applications, of course. Some great kind of nugget stories on potential helium applications that he'd thought of, and I'm sure he's got so many more besides when we unlock that mind. But that meant we also managed to squeeze in Teresa Kjell from Chemsec, the International Chemicals Secretariat, to tell us all about this PFAS issue, these forever chemicals, and what the problem is there.
Yeah, and let's take a listen to this short clip where she discusses sort of the basics around PFAS and also the legal process that we're currently seeing take place.
PFAS is a very special group of chemicals. They are extremely persistent. They don't break down. They are man-made. They're also mobile, which means that they travel through the different media, so they end up in the water, in the food that we eat, in our blood. I tested my blood. My values are too high, and I'm sure it's the same for most of you, unfortunately. But when you talk about how to get rid of these, you first have to understand where you use them. And that's not very easy. And a couple of years back, I would say that the level of knowledge was quite low. Everybody knew that, okay, you have them in textiles, in the Teflon pans, and so forth, but not so much about the more complex uses. Nowadays, you know more about electronics and semiconductors and so forth. So many of these uses have alternatives available already, and I listed the easiest ones. And as you see, they are all consumer uses. That's an easy fix. But that is just 20% of all emissions of PFAS. And as it doesn't break down and builds up in the environment and in our bodies, of course, 20% doesn't cut it. I also listed F-gases there, because this is a very important use. That is responsible for 63% of all emissions, so very, very important. And then with F-gases, I mean what is used in heat pumps, but also, for instance, in submersion cooling of data centers and so forth. And we can see that even for these uses where we have alternatives available, the transition hasn't really happened. So it really shows the need for regulation in place. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. It's also very important for all these companies that have put money into this transformation, and they need to have a return of investments, clearly. And the most important thing for companies and investors is always predictability. So what about the legal processes? A few years back, 5 member states in the EU, basically, submitted a dossier to say we need to restrict all PFAS in all uses, in general, but with relevant derogations. They sent it out for public consultation. They received more than 5,000 answers. Great. And right now, all of these uses are gone through one by one in the scientific committees of ECHA. ECHA is the European Chemicals Agency, and we are part of that process. We are an accredited stakeholder. So we're in there talking about all of these different uses. Like, for instance, those asthma inhalers is part of it, because that was actually a PFAS that was mentioned before. When this is done, they will revise the proposal of what derogations should be allowed. And then it's up to the Commission to take, the EU Commission to take a decision. We think that this might happen early 2026.
And that was Theresa Kell there. Only a short clip, but like you say, we're going to dedicate a whole episode to PFAS, so we won't use too much of that here.
Yeah, she gave the audience a lot of information in a shorter period of time while she was on stage, and she had to actually dash and get a train. But she ran us through the PFAS basics, like you said, and the legal process. And for anyone that isn't aware, this is the subject of forever chemicals that can get into our water ecosystem. It is said that most of us have got PFAS traces in our blood as a result, and it's a big sustainability issue for humans and nature. And there's a lot of talk, more than talk in fact, there's a lot of progress going on at the moment with the potential ban or restriction on various PFAS. I feel like I've researched a lot of this recently for our latest RiskWatch report at GasWorld, and I was able to put some of those questions to Theresa on stage with mixed responses, I would say. She's got to be careful, and there's still a lot of unknowns out there, but perhaps I could point listeners in the direction of that RiskWatch report just released this week, hot off the press. A very insightful report into all facets of the PFAS conversation and how it could affect the industrial gases business, with everything from the upstream production of oxygen in air separation units through to the lubricants and paste used in medical oxygen valves, through to the membranes used in electrolyzers for green hydrogen, and so much more besides. So very varied, and we did give that a 4 out of 5 risk score. So I'd urge everyone to, if you're a subscriber or you want to get hold of that report, visit gasworld.com and take a look.
Yeah, certainly well worth a read. And that did bring our event to a close. Just final few words on Utrecht. You enjoy it there? Our second time there, of course.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to like about the place? Particularly the old town. Wonderful. I just love the vibe in the Netherlands, I have to say. In all of my experiences there in different places, it's been fantastic. I think the event was... It feels like that event is established now. It's the second one. We're fulfilling a need in the market, clearly. We grew the event, 30% year on year, which is good, perhaps more than that. And next year, of course, as I said, we've confirmed we're taking it to Frankfurt. We're scaling the event further. We have our headline sponsor with the Messe Group, based just outside Frankfurt. And we'll be diving into so many of these topic strands again, and so much more besides.
And that will be taking place between the 9th and 11th of June 2026. So if listeners are interested in that, then they should visit gasworldconferences.com for all the information and to register their interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Do register your interest. We keenly watch all of that, and we'll be in contact with you. And we'll have some pretty big announcements to come in the weeks ahead about the theme and the agenda and the speakers for that event.
So plenty of news ahead. We've been recording for quite a while now, so perhaps we should get out of here. But
what else do we have to look forward to, Tom?
Well, we are now heading into Q3, so we're halfway through the year. So perhaps we should have a sit down with our editors and have a bit of a mid-year review.
Sounds like it's due, doesn't it?
Yeah, we did one at the start of the year. I believe. So
a lot's changed since then.
So we'll try and tie them down in the next couple of weeks and hear from them. The big news across hydrogen, global, US, we'll bring it all into one place.
I think it'd be good as well to ask them what's going on in some of those markets like CO2 and helium. We've just heard a bit there, but it's very quiet on the CO2 side. We're into the typical shortage season now. Could we expect something to happen or not between now and, I don't know, late September? And we've got our CO2 summit in Denver, of course, in late September. So it'd be interesting to get a viewpoint on that, as well as the hydrogen winter that's so enduring. How are we going to come out of that? Helium and so much more besides. And, of course, GWGI awards.
So much to look forward to. You say hydrogen winter, certainly not winter here, so let's get back out into that sunshine.
Let's do it.
During that heat wave. Thanks for listening. Do please like, follow and share, and we'll be back again next week.